Hey everybody, this is JDGaming back today with another episode of Get Better at Yu-Gi-Oh! So today's episode is a little bit different. Instead of being inspired by a bunch of articles, this is more something that I just thought about over time and came to a conclusion on. And that's using searchable main deck tech and the extra deck in order to maximize your consistency. Now, the story can start with a card like Thunder King Ryo. Thunder King was an all-star monster back in the day. This is a card that many people like to main deck 2 or 3 copies of because of its 2 very powerful effects. One of its effects allows it to absorb a special summoned monster if it's an inherent summon, so a card like Cyber Dragon that says specifically where it's summoned from, or a card from the extra deck, whether that is a Synchro Xyz or even a Pendulum summon of just one monster in Thunder King's case, you could just absorb with Thunder King. But of course, Thunder King had the other effect that was like the trap card Mistake, and it prevented people from adding cards from their deck to their hand, and because of these 2 very potent effects, Thunder King was deemed limit-worthy because it prevented the opponent from playing the game if Thunder King came up turn 1. What that limitation really did is make it very difficult for a player who wants to run Thunder King in either the main or side to actually open with this card before the opponent has a chance to do anything. And in my opinion, that has completely killed the card off and made it almost useless. Here's why. We talked in the last few weeks about how cards can be very time sensitive. In the case of Thunder King, you really want to use it as a monster that prevents your opponent from setting up. Once your opponent has a bigger monster than Thunder King, it's not really useful at all unless your deck has some really weird way of using just a level 4 light thunder monster. It's really played for that effect, and if you're too late on floodgating your opponent with it, you just can't do anything at all. Nowadays, people like playing Mistake instead because by just playing 2 or 3 copies of only Mistake, they don't have to deal with the awkwardness of drawing a Thunder King and not being able to both stop the opponent and make their plays. Instead, they'll just set Mistake behind whatever else that they wanted to do, and they'll still have the consistency of opening with Mistake, since it's at 3, before the opponent has a chance to do anything. And that's really unfortunate for Thunder King Ryo. But today we're going to discuss some options that you guys can play based on the decks that you already have, or just decks in general, to take advantage of searchable options that don't suffer from Thunder King syndrome. One such card that is very popular is Reinforcement of the Army. This is popular in Satellar Knights, Heroes, you name it. If it has warriors, even just a handful of them, it probably will run Reinforcement of the Army. Rhoda is really powerful because of its very vast pool that it can search from, and that is really the reason why this card is on the limited list to begin with. It's just too powerful in terms of the options it gives you. Let's say you're playing a hero deck and you're having trouble against Burning Abyss when they've already established a Dante on the board. It may be helpful to consider siding in cards that would be able to deal with the Dante through Reinforcement of the Army. For example, if you play DD Warrior Lady, you can banish that Dante immediately, and if you have a Dark Law up next to this guy, you would banish all of the other materials that are next to it. If you play something like Summoner Monk and can fetch DD Warrior Lady through that method as well, then that's just another option that you have. An alternative may be Aaron Lightsworn Monk. This is a card that's also searchable off of Charge of the Light Brigade if you run that search spell. Because of its ability to kick away a defense position monster back to the deck without destroying it or sending it to the graveyard, it can be a powerful out to any deck that plays defensive monsters as its main cards. So if you're already playing Reinforcement of the Army, if you're already playing Charge of the Light Brigade, these are just a couple of examples that you may use to help fight against some of the tougher cards in today's metagames. A second example I want to go over is more for fun at the current time. It's Artifacts. So Artifacts are a deck that use their Ignitions and Sanctums in order to bring out Moral Attack and Scythe to gain control of the game, either destroying the opponent's threats or just preventing opponents' access to the extra deck. It then has the ability to recur the monsters using cards like Call of the Haunted and Oasis of Dragon Souls, so it becomes a very potent control strategy that also has access to some of the strongest rank 5 monsters in the game, like Constellar Pleiades. This deck actually has some very good access to Archlord Christia if you build the deck carefully. For instance, by playing Brilliant Fusion, an artifact player can send any artifact to the graveyard to load for Call of the Haunted or Oasis of Dragon Souls, while summoning out their Gem Knight Seraphonite Knight, who serves as a level 5 monster that gives them the ability to tribute summon any dead level 5 monsters from their hand in a single turn. This obviously opens up the plays with recursive traps and Xyz summons, but if you send an Archlord Christia to the graveyard using Brilliant Fusion, you're able to revive that behemoth immediately from the graveyard and shut your opponent out of plays entirely, much like how Artifact's Scythe would work. If you're playing a deck like Artifacts, it's possible to squeeze this type of tech in, even if you may not have thought of that before. Of course, I can't go over every example ever of possible cards you could be main decking that fits with every deck, because everyone's engine will be different, and if you're playing specific cards, you have a different card pool that you have easy access to than someone else. So, what if we go somewhere where a lot more of us can take advantage of the situation? We all know that Dante is a great Xyz monster in Burning Abyss because it gets you so many free resources. But the first time I saw this card, before I knew what Burning Abyss was going to become in the competitive field, I saw this card as, wow, this is a generic Xyz monster that works just like Card Trooper. And ever since then, I've been wanting to build like a Grand Soil deck or a Lightsworn deck or anything that could use the milling effect of Dante or Card Trooper and see, can I really take advantage of both of these cards? And in testing, what I had ultimately found out is most of the time, Dante proved superior to Card Trooper if you could bring out the Xyz monster consistently. And the reason is, whereas you could draw Card Trooper late in the game and have it be a dead card, much like a Thunder King that comes out post setup, you could just summon the Dante as long as you had access to some Xyz play. And that opens up the game in such a way that you can build your deck to just summon rank 3s consistently and always have access to Card Trooper's effect. Similarly, we could play extra deck monsters instead of playing their main decked counterparts in order to gain some consistency. A great example from the side deck that we'll be seeing pretty soon is these two cards from the Blue Eyes matchup. Ally of Justice Cycle Reader and DD Crow both are hand traps that have the ability to banish a card or cards from your opponent's graveyard, which is great for shutting off Blue Eyes White Dragon recursion effects. If your deck doesn't die to that type of a play and you still have defenses to fight back, it may actually be worth playing a card like Rhapsody and Berserk in your extra deck or side deck instead. The reason is, whereas Rhapsody isn't a spell speed 2 where you can chain it to your opponent's plays and shut them off, if you can empty their graveyard, it does indeed help prevent Blue Eyes from getting all those free summons later on. It destroys their setup. So if you can survive, it may be worth playing a card that you can more consistently and reliably get than these two cards, because if you don't see these two, you're out of luck. Whereas if you're packing Rhapsody, you take that little bit of a loss that, yes, you can't stop your opponent mid-play sequence, but if you can survive or hinder that in some other way, you can permanently take care of the situation much more often than you would expect. Another great Xyz monster people just love experimenting with is Traptrix Rafflesia. This rank 4 can be summoned using any 2 level 4 monsters and has the ability to provide your deck a ton of defensive options no matter what you're playing. Everyone already knows about Bottomless Trap Hole and how it used to be one of the kings of monster removal. Banishing anything with a high attack stat of 1500 or more, permanently removing it from the game in many cases, was just such a powerful effect that this card got limited before Rafflesia was even printed to abuse this card. But since then, there have been many more cards that have been printed. We have a card like Treacherous Trap Hole that can snare 2 monsters your opponent plays at once. If your opponent is going for a big play, overextending a bit, you can punish them by playing this even if you play no other trap cards already. You could play the new Floodgate Trap Hole to deal with monsters like Burning Abyss, flipping them face down and forcing them to self-destruct, as well as just putting monsters out of play just long enough that you can deal with them in your own time later. Time Space Trap Hole has been a popular card to play against Burning Abyss and Cosmo because of the ability to shuffle cards away into the deck without letting them ever hit the graveyard, and even cards like Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare had their heyday back when Murmilio was popular because of its ability to deal with monster effects. You can see so much variety comes out from just a single monster, so if your deck can already play rank 4s, you may want to consider playing Traptrix Rafflesia and exploring all the different trap hole options that are available to you to see if that can provide the kind of defense that you are looking for. Finally, Xyz monsters aren't the only cards that are very good at giving you unique advantages. Depending on the deck, you can use some great synchro monsters as well. Royal Decree is a very powerful card that lets you go and shut down all the traps on the board, so if you're not playing many defenses in trap card form yourself, it may seem like a great idea to play Royal Decree to shut out your opponent entirely. Problem is, with the advent of Twin Twisters, Royal Decree and many other floodgates are extremely difficult to keep alive, so you may want to consider other options. But what if you have access to some earth monsters? You may want to start playing cards like Crane and Naturia Barkion, because this will let you prevent all of your opponent's trap effects as long as the Barkion remains on the field, as long as you just have enough cards in your graveyard to fuel that banish effect. Because you don't have to draw Naturia Barkion, it becomes a lot easier in decks like Psychics, X-Sabers, Karakuri, Geargia, whatever earth strategy you may be playing, to bring out this trap-stopping monster and take control of the duel. Finally, I can't tell you how many times I heard from people and how many times I say myself that Dark Hole just isn't the best card in most matchups nowadays. Usually this card is relegated to the side deck, and that's because people don't want to be playing this in an environment where Burning Abyss and Cosmo are largely unaffected and actually gain some resources off of the card that you just played. To help make sure you don't have too many problems with Dark Hole, but still have access to a field wipe that equalizes the board, you may want to consider Plant Synchro's very old favorite Black Rose Dragon by playing a copy of Debris Dragon in any deck that can play something weak enough to fulfill its summoning requirements. Another cool thing is the fact that with the release of the new Coral Dragon from Dark Illusion, any deck playing Max C has access to spot removal as well if you are willing to play the Debris Dragon with it. So these are just a few different examples. Of course, it's not an all-inclusive list by any account, because there's just no way I can go over everything. However, hopefully this gives you some ideas and insight as to what types of cards you can play in your main or extra deck that would give you more reach and mimic powerful cards that you may not necessarily want to draw into every game, and see if that helps speed up your strategies and ensure victory more often. Let me know down in the comments below any other ideas you've come up with that allow you to sneak a card to your hand faster than your opponent may be prepared for, and what you think of this series thus far. If you have any other ideas for the future as well, that would also be appreciated. Thanks guys, this is JDGaming, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.